Joining me now is Jonathan Conricus, former spokesperson for the IDF, also a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, co-founder of Bottom Line Media. Jonathan, good to have you back.
Hello, Jim. Thanks for having me.
So as you're aware, the U.S. president says that there are people starving in Gaza, as have the leaders of several of Israel's closest allies. Prime Minister Netanyahu, he says there is no starvation in Gaza. In your view, what is the reality there?
What I understand the reality to be on the ground in Gaza is that the main problem isn't the amount of food that exists in the Gaza Strip, but it is who has its hands on that food and how it is distributed. And there's great inequality between those that have power, either strong clans or Hamas-affiliated families, and of course Hamas fighters, who get food, get aid, have everything they need. In some of the more posh areas, and that's starkly different visuals than what you're showing on the screen now, you can still see open restaurants and cafes in other parts of Gaza. I just scrolled social media from Gaza, and you can see that as well.
Jonathan, I'm not sure that accurately reflects the situation there. I'm going to quote from Avi Merer of the Jerusalem Journal, formerly the Jerusalem Post, who has been a great defender of Israeli military actions there, but also even Israeli aid distribution. He says the admirable efforts of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation have proven insufficient and have been accompanied by terrible loss of life on the part of both civilians and aid workers. The prices of basic food items have skyrocketed, suggesting that the scarcity is becoming more acute and that a full-scale humanitarian collapse could be imminent. The pictures don't lie.
I don't know what he bases that on, but actually both of these things can happen at the same time. There is food in Gaza. It's just not accessible to everybody who needs it. And there are people that are suffering. But on the other hand, there's people, and Hamas has food. But I think the bottom line here is I think we should recognize that Hamas has scored a very important strategic victory. They have done a successful media campaign, which has been followed by a diplomatic effort. And
Jonathan,
we see
that implies that the media is not doing its job. I speak to aid organizations, doctors virtually every day who are witnessing the suffering there. And to be clear, as you know, a USAID study found that 1% of USAID-funded aid was affected by loss, theft, diversion, fraud, or waste. The New York Times reported in the last several days that Israeli officials say that the IDF has not found proof that Hamas has systematically stolen aid. So to say that this is all a Hamas problem doesn't match up with, is not supported by the facts.
No, you're not correct. And citing anonymous sources that were reported in the New York Times is not credible.
It's not just the New York Times. It's a USAID. It's a USAID study of its own aid and what has been taken by Hamas and what hasn't done. And to be clear, Jonathan, you and I have known each other a long time. I talk to witnesses on the ground every day who speak to shortages there. Doctors who are treating people who are starving and are treating people who are getting injured or shot when they go to these aid sites. So it's not just a disinformation campaign. These are accounts we're getting from the ground.
Biggest part of it, Jim. I think that is the biggest part of it. And, just about speaking about disinformation, how many times was the word Hamas mentioned in the last story that we saw? It wasn't mentioned even once. I listened for it and I waited to hear how many times was Hamas, the governing organization that controls the Gaza Strip, that controls the civilian population, that started the war, how many times was it mentioned? Well, zero.
As you know, Jonathan, we've covered Hamas's terror attacks in Gaza and in Israel for months and years. What I'm talking about now is who is getting aid to the people who need it. And Israel has control over large parts of Gaza, and Israel is running the aid distribution. So does Israel not share responsibility?
Actually not. Actually not. Israel runs part of it, and part of it is run by UN-affiliated organizations that up until a few days ago boycotted Israeli efforts to bring in food. Food was in Gaza, waiting to be picked up by UN trucks, and they simply boycotted it, and there were 950 truckloads of food in the Gaza sun.
Well, I'm aware of this talking point, but when we speak to aid groups, they say this.
Tim, I don't think that's fair.
But we test the thing
everything that Israel says a talking point.
I don't call everything that Israel says a talking point. I only call talking points a talking point. My understanding from speaking to AIDS organizations and other outlets, including Reuters, have reported this, is that Israel is requiring the UN to offload aid at the border and then send trucks internally within Gaza to pick it up. And what I hear from aid groups, I spoke to one yesterday called Heal Palestine, that they were able to get food in prior, and they can't get food in now. So there's an issue there, right? They say because Israel is not approving. They say that Israel is not approving their aid shipments in, or making it harder for them to get the aid in.
Yeah, in my mind, the issue is that Hamas wants exactly what's happening now. Hamas wants a humanitarian disaster. Hamas wants this, and they are using it very effectively to create diplomatic pressure on Israel through media coverage, through leveraging the suffering of the Palestinian population. I can assure you that there is no shortage of food with Hamas fighters and with Hamas-affiliated families. And I can say that what all of the things that are happening now, the UK recognition, future recognition, and many of the other diplomatic things that are happening that are tremendously important and meaningful for the region. The first thing that they're doing is strengthening Hamas, and it tells Hamas, you don't need to go for a deal, you don't need to release hostages, and you can carry on doing what you're doing, which is fighting, refusing for a ceasefire, and not releasing any of the Israeli hostages. That is the meaning of what we're seeing.
I don't doubt and I don't question that Hamas does not seek propaganda value from the suffering of the Palestinian people. What I'm asking is whether you grant that Israel has responsibility for what we're seeing on the ground there now. And to be clear, remember, it's Prime Minister Netanyahu who, when he withdrew from the ceasefire in March, announced that aid shipments would be halted in order to pressure Hamas. He said he said it in as many words.
Yeah, Jim, on this, we agree. This is a tremendous, colossal failure of Israeli strategy under Prime Minister Netanyahu. It is a 180-degree about-face, and it is Israel running out of diplomatic runway as a result of ineffective operations on the ground and a very effective information campaign by Hamas and its supporters in the Arab world and in Europe. That is what we're seeing. But it doesn't change reality, and we mustn't confuse that with cause and effect. We are in this situation because Hamas started a war, because they took our hostages, and because they are refusing to ceasefire deals, and they're refusing to return the hostages. That is why we're here. That is why the Palestinian population is suffering. That is why there is a humanitarian catastrophe or a very significant situation on the ground. It isn't because Israel is fighting. It's very easy to pin responsibility on Israel, but at the end of the day, beyond the moving pictures of starving children, some of them with pre-existing conditions. We saw that picture of a young boy who
I've heard this story too, but Jonathan, I've talked to doctors who treated many dozens of malnourished, many dozens of malnourished children and others. It's not just images of people suffering from other things. They can't get enough food. They can't get enough. So my question is, going forward, what? And I appreciate you acknowledging that Israel shares responsibility here, as you have done in the past. You have said in other interviews you've granted mistakes when mistakes happened, etc. What do you believe Israel needs to do now to lessen the suffering of the Palestinian people, civilians there?
Yeah, what Israel needs to do now is to make a very difficult decision. And I'd remind everybody that this war is about defending Israel from the attacks of Hamas and making sure that Hamas won't be able to conduct an October 7 attack again. That is why Israel is fighting. That is the objective here. That is what Israel needs to achieve. And Israel, and of course, to get our hostages back, 20 live hostages and 30 murdered hostages that are still held by Hamas, and Hamas is refusing to let them go. What Israel needs to do is to make a very tough choice, whether to continue the war by using military means or to basically capitulate to international pressure. And it depends very much on what the US president will say and feel. And I'm saddened to see that he too has been influenced by the information campaign that has been ongoing and is ongoing. But at the end of the day, it's between these two options. It can either go to a victory for Hamas, thanks to the media operations that we've seen, or it can go to an all-out significant escalation where Israel will say, despite everything happening, we will have to continue and pursue our goals to defend Israeli civilians from Hamas and make sure that Hamas never is able to govern the Gaza Strip or to attack Israel. Listen, and again. If you ask me what I think is likely, I think that the first option, sadly, is more likely. And I'm saddened by it because it means that Hamas has been granted a victory and that Israelis will be less safe and people in Gaza will continue to suffer.
I understand the actions of a terrorist group, and I've covered them myself, but to say that this is entirely, the images we're seeing, the accounts we are hearing from people on the ground is entirely a media campaign just doesn't seem to match up with the facts. But let's
I haven't said entirely, Jim. I haven't said entirely, but I've said that this is an orchestrated effort by Hamas with a political objective, and sadly, it is successful. Are there people that are suffering in Gaza? Undoubtedly. There are people who have gone through hell in Gaza, and there's no doubt. But the political objective is, I think, what matters here, and this is what Hamas has done.
Jonathan Conricus, we appreciate you taking the hard questions. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.